They said it was just another court hearing, a mundane appearance in a long line of royal disputes. But what unfolded inside that packed London courtroom sent shockwaves across the globe. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but the whispers that leaked out painted a picture so explosive, so utterly unthinkable, that every reporter stationed outside dropped their carefully prepared notes and began shouting live on air. Prince Harry, usually calm, composed, and practiced in the art of royal deflection, suddenly shattered his own image in one scorching moment that left even the stern-faced judge gripping the edge of the bench. Witnesses swore, his voice cracked like thunder as he confronted the very people who had hounded him for years, his words echoing through the chamber like cannon fire. Gasps turned into chaos. The press gallery erupted into frantic scribbling, and one court officer was overheard saying, "This is going to tear the palace apart." The scene was set like a movie. Tense silence, the smell of old wood and varnish, the heavy air of centuries of tradition pressing down. When Harry leaned forward, eyes blazing, "Do you think you can humiliate me forever?" he barked, pointing directly across the aisle. It wasn't just the press barons sitting stone-faced. It wasn't just the lawyers nervously shuffling their papers. It was the ghosts of scandals past, dragged into the light by a prince who had had enough. Some in the gallery clutched their mouths, others exchanged nervous glances, and one reporter from a major American network whispered into her live microphone, "This is the moment we've been waiting for." The courtroom crackled with confrontation. A media mogul tried to sneer, but Harry cut him down with a glare so sharp it could have carved through the oak panels. Every word was a dagger, aimed not just at the press. The moment Harry's furious outburst pierced the courtroom, the response was immediate and electric. Lawyers stumbled over their notes, scrambling to regain control, but it was already spiraling into pure chaos. Reporters pressed forward, eyes wide, pens trembling, desperate not to miss a single syllable of what had become a live theater of rage. And then came the retaliation. A silver-haired barrister, representing one of the most notorious tabloids in Britain, stood tall and shot back with words dripping in venom. "Your Highness," he spat, mocking the title with a sneer, "you've made a career out of playing the victim. You say you want privacy, but you're here today parading your pain for the cameras you claim to despise." The gallery gasped. It was the line that would ignite the inferno. Harry's jaw tightened, his fists clenched against the polished wooden table, and for a moment it seemed he might actually leap to his feet and storm across the aisle. The judge barked, "Control yourself." But the prince ignored it, his voice cutting through the chamber like a whip. "Privacy," he thundered. "You call this privacy? You call hacking my phones, stalking my wife, hounding my mother until her dying day privacy?" Each word landed heavier than the last, the room hanging on his every syllable. One journalist later said the tension was so thick it felt like the courtroom walls were closing in. Onlookers squirmed. The press defendants smirked nervously, but no one dared look away. And then came the twist. Harry reached beneath his papers, pulled out a folder, and held it aloft. "You want evidence? Here it is," he roared, slamming it onto the table so hard the sound reverberated like a gunshot. Pages spilled out alleged emails, secret recordings, whispered deals between press giants and palace insiders. And though no one outside knew exactly what the documents contained, the rumor mill ignited within seconds. By the time the session adjourned, London was in full meltdown. Outside, reporters shoved microphones into each other's faces, speculating wildly. Some claimed Harry had evidence of payoffs to silent scandals. Others swore he had proof of years-long conspiracies linking press barons directly to Buckingham Palace. Television panels erupted into shouting matches, anchors screaming over each other. Is the monarchy in danger? Is Harry a hero, or has he finally lost control? The footage replayed endlessly, dramatic headlines scrolling across the bottom of every screen. But one thing was undeniable. Harry's fury had broken through the royal armor. He wasn't a prince in that courtroom anymore. He was a man cornered, lashing out against the empire of humiliation that had defined his life. And the world couldn't look away, but at the entire establishment that had profited from his pain. "You sold my grief. You mocked my wife. You turned my life into your circus." His voice didn't just resit, roared, shaking the hushed decorum into a full-blown spectacle. Suddenly, the gavel slammed, the judge demanding order, but it was far too late. The dam had burst, and the prince had become a warrior. Outside, anchors interrupted broadcasts, with breaking banners flashing across the screen. Prince Harry erupts in courtroom meltdown, but inside, the clash raged on, setting the stage for a royal showdown unlike anything Britain or the world had ever seen. By the next morning, the courtroom explosion was no longer just a British scandal, it was global. Every major network in America, Europe, and Australia led with the same sensational headline: Prince Harry's secret courtroom meltdown. On breakfast shows, hosts shook their heads in mock disbelief while gleefully stoking the flames. "Ladies and gentlemen," one anchor proclaimed live, "we are watching the monarchy's dirty laundry unfold in real time." Twitter no. The entire internet was ablaze with hashtags like #HarryUnleashed and #Royal Showdown. Memes appeared, Within hours, Harry with fire in his eyes. Harry as a gladiator in a courtroom coliseum, Harry toppling the press with words instead of swords. Inside the royal household, however, things were far from amusing. Insiders leaked frantic whispers that Buckingham Palace was in full-blown crisis mode. Aides rushed between offices, phones rang endlessly, and an unnamed palace official was quoted saying, "We haven't seen this kind of direct attack." Since Diana's Panorama interview, the comparison alone sent shivers down spines because, if Harry was channeling Diana's spirit of defiance, the establishment knew the fallout could be catastrophic. Meanwhile, back on live television, the spin wars had begun. Tabloid loyalists brought their lawyers onto primetime panels, furiously defending their empires. "This is nothing more than a tantrum," one media pundit shouted, veins bulging in his neck. "Harry is exploiting his family name for pity." But across the split screen, royal defenders fired back with equal venom. "Exploiting?" another retorted, stabbing a finger into the camera. "This man has been hunted his entire life. He's finally saying what millions have been too afraid to." The segment descended into shouting so ferocious that the moderator's attempts at control became comical. Audiences didn't switch channels, they leaned closer. And then, the ultimate humiliation. One of the tabloid executives Harry had confronted personally appeared outside his glass-walled London office. Cameras rolling, declaring smugly, "If the prince wants war, we'll give him war." The words spread like wildfire, the image replayed in slow motion across social media, commentators dissecting his smirk as if it were a declaration of battle. By sundown, it wasn't just a court case anymore, it was a public brawl, a no-hold fight staged for the entire planet to watch. But Harry wasn't retreating. Behind closed doors, sources whispered he was preparing for round two, arming himself with even more explosive revelations, determined to drag every shadowy deal into the light. The courtroom had been the opening act. The true storm, everyone agreed, was still to come. And the question on every lip was the same: who would survive the firestorm when the next hearing began? The second day of the hearing began like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Crowds swarmed the courthouse, hundreds deep, holding signs that read justice for Harry and expose the press. Yet woven among the supporters were hecklers bellowing, "Stop whining, Harry," creating a battlefield of voices that reporters ate up like a feast. Cameras zoomed in on screaming faces, broadcasters describing the spectacle as a royal civil war playing out on the streets. Inside, the tension was suffocating, every wooden bench creaking under the weight of anticipation. Harry entered the courtroom with his jaw set like stone, his shoulders squared, as though walking into combat. But before he could even take his seat, the opposition struck. A senior lawyer representing a publishing empire shot to his feet, booming, "This entire performance is nothing but a circus act for publicity." His words dripped with disdain, echoing off the high walls. Gasps rippled through the room, but Harry didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned forward, eyes flashing, and fired back with a scathing retort. "The only circus here is the one you created out of my life." It was the verbal collision that lit the fuse. Reporters scribbled furiously, courtroom artists exaggerated the fiery expressions, and television pundits outside erupted in frenzied commentary. "Did you hear that?" one shouted live on air, clutching her earpiece. "Harry's calling them out directly, on their own turf." Meanwhile, in the gallery, one journalist muttered to another, "This is no longer testimony. This is war theater." And then came the bombshell moment. A witness for the press, a former paparazzo with a slick grin, was called to testify. He leaned back in his chair, oozing arrogance, and in a chilling voice declared, "I made a fortune off him. Every photo, every secret heat was open season. And the palace didn't stop me. They fed me." The courtroom froze. Even the judge's eyes widened. Harry's face went crimson, his voice shaking with fury as he shot to his feet. "How dare you drag my family into this?" he thundered. The gallery erupted in gasps, and the gavel pounded desperately. But it was too late. The spectacle had already spilled beyond control. Within minutes, clips of the testimony hit the airwaves, headlines flashing, "Palace fed the press." The notion that insiders may have colluded with tabloids was the kind of scandal that could topple reputations. On primetime, talking heads clashed in vicious debates, one screaming, "If this is true, the monarchy is complicit," while another snapped, "It's hearsay, lies from a bitter photographer." But for Harry, the damage was done. His private war had become a public inferno, and the palace walls he once called home seemed to be crumbling before the world's eyes. By day 3, the courthouse had transformed into a media carnival. Satellite trucks lined the block. Anchors barked into cameras as though narrating a heavyweight boxing match, and protesters clashed so loudly outside that police struggled to keep order. "This isn't just a trial," one breathless reporter announced live. "This is a battle for the soul of the monarchy itself." Inside, the gallery was overflowing. elbows jostling, cameras snapping at every movement, the air thick with sweat and expectation. Harry sat stone-faced, but when the session opened, the opposing counsel wasted no time striking at his very core. "Prince Harry," the barrister said, voice sharpened to a dagger. "Isn't it true that your vendetta against the press is simply revenge for your own failures, for walking away from your royal duties, for abandoning your family, for turning your back on your heritage?" The words landed like bombs. The gallery gasped, reporters nearly leapt out of their seats, and the judge raised an eyebrow as if even he couldn't believe the audacity. Harry's response was volcanic. He slammed his palm against the table so hard that pens rattled across the wood. "Failures," he roared. "I protected my wife. I protected my children. I did what this institution never had the courage to do, stand up to the parasites that destroyed my mother." His voice cracked like lightning, fury dripping from every syllable. The courtroom erupted, some in applause, others in jeers, until the judge thundered, "Order." But the damage was irreversible. Live television panels turned the clash into instant theater. "This is humiliation on a royal scale," one pundit yelled, veins bulging, as he argued across the table. "Harry is dismantling centuries of tradition on live TV." Another snapped back with equal venom, "Tradition? You mean protecting predators in the press and silencing victims in the palace? Don't you dare call that tradition." The shouting spiraled so fast that viewers at home tweeted memes of anchors red-faced screaming over each other, while ratings soared. The humiliation didn't end there. That evening, one of the tabloid lawyers went on a primetime show, smirking as he declared, "If Harry wants the truth, maybe he should start with himself. Ask about the skeletons in his closet." The implication was clear, the innuendo deliberate, and within minutes, social media exploded. Hashtags like #HarryExposed and #RoyalSecrets began trending, with wild speculation about what scandals might be lurking. For the prince, the confrontation was no longer confined to the courtroom walls. It was everywhere, on every screen, in every conversation, every headline. And though Harry's voice had cut like a sword, the opposition was sharpening their blades for the next strike. The world wasn't just watching, it was baying for blood. The following morning, the courthouse looked less like a place of law and more like a battlefield. Protest chants thundered outside, rival factions waving placards and screaming insults at one another. News helicopters buzzed overhead, their cameras zooming in on the melee as anchors breathlessly described the chaos. This is no longer a trial, it's a spectacle, a gladiator match with Prince Harry at the very center. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating, the gallery crammed so tight that spectators could hardly breathe. Harry entered with fire still blazing in his eyes, but his adversaries were ready to strike back harder than ever. The lead barrister, his voice dripping venom, slammed a stack of papers onto the desk and snarled, "Your Highness, we've uncovered something rather inconvenient." He held up the documents for effect, letting the silence stretch. "Evidence," he declared, "that you and your wife have been leaking private details for profit while crying victim to the very press you claim to despise." The courtroom gasped in unison. Harry's face darkened, his teeth clenched, and for a split second, the mask of composure cracked. "Lies," he bellowed, his voice ricocheting off the walls. "Absolute lies." But the lawyer only smirked, raising an eyebrow as though he'd scored a knockout punch. Reporters scribbled furiously, already drafting headlines that would scream across the front pages by morning. Harry, the hypocrite. Outside, the spin was immediate and vicious. Television hosts replayed the lawyer's words in endless loops, panelists ripping into Harry with gleeful cruelty. "He's humiliated himself," one sneered, wagging a finger at the camera. "You can't shout down the truth, Harry. The hypocrisy is undeniable." Across the split screen, another commentator fired back furiously, "Hypocrisy. This is a smear campaign, pure and simple. They've done this to Diana, they're doing it to Harry. It's the same bloody playbook." The shouting grew so savage that the moderator finally gave up, waving his arms helplessly as the segment dissolved into chaos. But the humiliation deepened when, during a recess, cameras caught Harry storming down the courthouse steps. His voice raised in a blistering exchange with a heckler shouting, "Traitor, Prince." Harry spun around, eyes blazing, and barked, "Better a traitor than a coward who hides behind lies." The clip went viral instantly. Memes painted him as both hero and villain, split down the middle, fueling the frenzy. By the end of the day, the battle lines were clearer than ever. Harry's supporters painted him as a warrior, finally tearing down a rotten system. His enemies called him a reckless pretender, desperate for relevance. But one thing was certain. The fight had left the courtroom and ignited into a nationwide global, and the flames were spreading fast. By the seventh day, the courtroom had turned into a pressure cooker on the verge of blowing apart. Every seat was filled, the air heavy with sweat and whispered speculation, and even the marble columns seemed to vibrate with the anticipation of yet another eruption. Reporters described it as the most explosive trial Britain has seen since the Profumo scandal, and audiences across the globe tuned in as though watching a season finale. This wasn't law anymore, it was bloodsport. The opposition came armed with their deadliest weapon yet, a former palace insider. He shuffled nervously to the stand, adjusted his tie, and with a voice that cracked but carried devastating weight, claimed, yes, there were times when Harry was difficult. He would rage at staff, lash out at courtiers. The tabloids didn't need to invent stories, his temper alone filled their pages. The words hit like dynamite. The gallery gasped. Cameras outside scrambled to beam the quote worldwide, and within minutes, social feeds were ablaze with the hashtag Harry exposed. Harry's face was scarlet. He leaped to his feet, finger jabbing the air like a sword. Lies, he roared, his voice shaking the rafters. I stood up for myself. I stood up for my wife. And you call that rage? You call that weakness? No, it was survival. And you, he pointed straight at the witness. You fed the wolves and called it loyalty. The gallery erupted into chaos, shouts and gasps colliding in a storm of noise as the judge's gavel pounded in vain. Outside, live broadcasts turned the confrontation into instant theater. Anchors replayed Harry's furious outburst in slow motion, his voice booming. Over dramatic graphics, Prince vs. Palace, the betrayal. On talk shows, pundits hurled insults at each other, red-faced and breathless. He's humiliating himself. One screamed, pounding the table. This is tantrum politics. Another shot back, tantrum. No, this is bravery. He's ripping off the mask and showing the rot beneath the crown. The shouting grew so fierce that producers let it roll, ratings spiking with every insult. But the ultimate blow came when a tabloid splashed its front page with the headline, Royal Tyrant. Alongside an unflattering caricature of Harry screaming, the smear was brutal, designed to wound, and wound it did. On camera, Harry's allies fumed, but detractors laughed openly, savoring his humiliation. The prince had wanted justice, but instead, he was becoming the very caricature his enemies longed for. Yet even battered, Harry wasn't backing down. That night, insiders whispered that he was preparing a nuclear move, a revelation so devastating it could not only shatter the press, but scorch the palace itself. The stage was set for the most dramatic collision yet, and the world braced itself for detonation. The next morning, the courthouse buzzed like a live wire. Crowds stretched for blocks, their chants echoing off the stone walls, some screaming justice for Harry, while others hurled venom with equal force. Shame on the spare. The police barricades shook under the weight of a divided public, and reporters described the atmosphere as a powder keg, seconds from explosion. Inside, the courtroom was a furnace, every glance sharpened into a dagger, every whisper carrying the tension of centuries of royal scandal. Harry wasted no time. Rising to his feet with a folder clutched tight in his hand, he declared, "You want the truth? Fine, here it is." His voice thundered across the chamber as he slapped down pages that rattled like gunfire. Correspondence between palace officials and the press. They didn't just let you in, they opened the gates and sold me out. Gasps erupted. The gallery shifted in shock. Lawyers scrambled in panic, and the judge leaned forward, eyebrows raised as though even he couldn't believe what he was hearing. But the opposition struck back with venom. A smirking attorney leaned into the microphone, voice dripping contempt. "Prince Harry," he sneered, "are we really supposed to believe that you, the man who's cashed in on your own family with books, interviews, and television, are the victim here? You cry about betrayal, but the real betrayer is you." The words detonated like a bomb. Gasps turned into murmurs, murmurs into shouts, and one member of the gallery screamed, "He's right." Harry snapped. His chair screeched as he surged to his feet, fists trembling, face burning with rage. "How dare you twist this?" he bellowed, his voice cracking into a roar. "I told my story because you tried to silence me. I fought back because you tried to bury me. Don't you dare call me the betrayer. You are the liars, the cowards, the parasites." The room erupted into pandemonium. Reporters scrambled, the gavel slammed helplessly, and one juror was so stunned she dropped her pen onto the floor with a loud clatter. Outside, the confrontation became the clip of the century. Networks aired it in endless loops. Headlines screamed Prince in full meltdown, and primetime debates devolved into screaming matches. One panelist mocked, "He's lost it completely, lost it," while another shouted back, "No, this is bravery, raw and unfiltered." Audiences around the world devoured every second, unable to look away. But even as Harry raged like a cornered lion, the humiliation grew sharper. The tabloid front pages the next morning were merciless. Caricatures of Harry with wild eyes, headlines branding him the Mad Prince. He had hurled his truth like a weapon, but his enemies had twisted it into a spectacle of shame. And still, the fight was far from over. The courthouse was no longer just a stage for testimonia, it was a coliseum. and by day 9, the world watched as if waiting for the final kill. Satellite feeds broadcast every second, news tickers screamed with words like chaos, meltdown, betrayal, and still the crowds outside swelled, chanting so loudly the courtroom windows rattled. Inside, the energy was suffocating, each side circling like predators, waiting for blood. Harry's enemies struck first. A tabloid tycoon himself, summoned to testify, strode to the stand with a smirk carved onto his face. His voice oozed arrogance. As he declared, the prince is no victim. He's a hypocrite who built his fortune selling the very secrets he now claims were stolen. The gallery gasped, reporters scribbled furiously, and the smirk only widened. He paused, then twisted the knife deeper. Perhaps the court should ask why his own brother wants nothing to do with him. The words detonated. Murmurs became a frenzy. Harry's fist slammed the table, his voice a thunderclap that silenced the room. "Leave my family out of this," he roared, his face contorted with rage. "You don't get to pit us against each other for your profit." The gallery erupted, some shouting, "Bravo," while others hissed and jeered. It was no longer was combat. Outside television anchors salivated over the spectacle. "This is humiliation on a global scale," one crowed. "A prince being mocked in open court." Another shot back, live on air, mocked. "No, this is revolution. He's fighting a machine bigger than any monarchy." Their clash devolved into the kind of shouting match audiences craved, each insult louder than the last, their veins bulging as producers egged them on for ratings. But Harry's humiliation deepened when, in the middle of the session, a damning text message was read aloud in exchange, allegedly showing his frustration with Palisades. The opposition's lawyer read the words in a booming voice. "I can't trust anyone. They'll all sell me out." The courtroom roared with whispers. Harry's jaw clenched, his knuckles white as he tried to steady himself. But the damage was done. The quote flashed across news screens within minutes, splashed in bold. "Harry can't trust anyone." By evening, the prince was trending worldwide, not as a crusader, but as a broken man unraveling under pressure. Memes mocked him, late-night hosts turned his fury into punchlines, and tabloid headlines branded him the paranoid prince. Yet even as the world laughed, Harry's allies swore he was preparing the ultimate strike, the revelation that would either vindicate him completely or destroy him forever. The final day arrived like the climax of a scandalous drama the world couldn't stop watching. Crowds outside the courthouse surged in the thousands, their chants deafening roar that shook the air. Banners waved, cameras flashed like lightning, and news anchors described the scene with the breathless intensity of a sports final. "This is it," one shouted live. "The showdown. The day Prince Harry either silences his enemies or is humiliated forever." Inside, the chamber felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. Harry stood tall, exhaustion etched into his face, but defiance blazing in his eyes. As the judge called the session to order, the opposing counsel launched their last attack, sneering, "Your Highness, the world sees you as nothing more than a spoiled child throwing tantrums. You claim to fight corruption, but all you've done is destroy your own legacy." The words sliced the air, cold and sharp, and the courtroom held its breath. Then Harry struck back. His voice rang out, thunderous, shaking the very rafters. "My legacy is not for you to define," he roared. "You may mock me, humiliate me, twist my words, but I will never bow to parasites who profit from pain. I will never let you bury the truth again." He tore open his folder, holding up a final document with trembling hands. "This is the proof of deals between palace insiders and your vile papers. Proof that the institution itself fed you stories about me, about my family just to keep your claws satisfied." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Gasps turned into shouts. Lawyers leaped to their feet. Reporters bolted for the doors to break the story first. The judge's gavel pounded desperately, but it was drowned beneath the roar. Inside the gallery, one witness fainted, another screamed, "It's over." And outside, the crowds exploded as word spread like wildfire. Palace betrayal exposed. Television anchors nearly lost their voices, shouting over one another. "This is unprecedented," one bellowed. "A royal tearing down his own house on live television." Another snapped, "He's not tearing it down, he's saving it from rot." The clash raged on. Red faces, pointed fingers, veins bulging, as audiences worldwide devoured every second. By nightfall, Harry had become both hero and villain, recognized by some, mocked by others, but undeniably the most talked about figure on the planet, the prince who shattered silence, the man who turned a courtroom into a battlefield, the royal who refused to be humiliated without a fight. And as the credits rolled on this real-life drama, one thing was certain. The story was far from over. The storm would rage for years. The fallout would ripple through history, but for now, The world had witnessed the moment Prince Harry became more than a royal. He became a warrior. If you want more explosive stories like this one, make sure you subscribe to HOA Storysphere because the next shockwave is only a click away.